In a cold morgue room, Dr. Mark and Dr. Sarah were meticulously working on the body of a young man in his 30s. The victim's face was thin, and a bullet hole was visible in the middle of his forehead. His facial features were frozen, as if telling the story of the death he had faced. Dr. Mark began examining the body, using sharp autopsy tools. Dr. Sarah was taking notes beside him. The bullet wound in the middle of the forehead looks clean. I think the gun was close to the head when the shot was fired, Mark said quietly. Sarah took the ruler and measured the diameter of the hole. 9 millimeters exactly. This bullet appears to be from a 9 millimeters pistol. She quickly wrote the note in the report, then looked at Mark. Do you think the bullet was the primary cause of death? Mark nodded hesitantly. We need to continue examining to be sure. After a few minutes of careful examination, Mark noticed the fine traces of rope around the victim's neck. The traces were faint but clear under the bright lighting. Sarah, look here. There are traces of rope around his neck. Sarah raised her eyebrows in surprise. So, he might have been hanged. But why is there a gunshot wound to his forehead? Are we facing a double murder? Mark sat for a moment to think. I think we'd better take a break. We're exhausted. We'll talk to the investigator tomorrow and tell him what we found. The next day, Mark and Sarah headed to the investigator's office. The investigator was eagerly waiting for them to learn the details of the autopsy. After explaining to him what they found, everyone agreed to return to the morgue to complete the examination. The goal was to understand exactly how the victim died. While completing the examination, Mark took a sample of the victim's blood for examination. After hours of waiting, the results came back. There are traces of poison in the blood, but it is weak. This can't be the main cause of death. Sarah took the sample and studied it carefully. The poison might be one of those that slow the heart but are not immediately fatal. It might have been given to him before the accident to weaken him. Based on the new information, they decided to visit the victim's home to obtain additional evidence. Upon their arrival, they noticed something strange in the bedroom. There were traces of a rope hanging from the ceiling, but it had fallen to the floor. It looks like there was an attempt to hang him here, Sarah said as she studied the rope. The detective began to search the closet and found a 9 millimeters pistol hidden under the clothes. This could be the weapon used, the detective said seriously as he carefully raised the pistol. The fingerprints were lifted from the pistol, and to everyone's surprise they turned out to be the victim's. The detective looked at Mark and Sarah and asked, could he have committed suicide? But Mark had his doubts. If he committed suicide, how was the gun hidden after his death? There must be someone else in the picture. This isn't just a suicide. Why didn't he steal anything from the house? Sarah wondered as she looked around. If there was a killer, why didn't he take anything? It looks like the work of a psychopath, who probably wanted nothing more than to cause harm. The three exchanged glances, trying to solve this complex puzzle. They knew that there was a bigger secret behind this crime, and that the truth might be more mysterious than they imagined. At the end of the investigation, after gathering all the evidence, the investigator decides to interview the victim's close childhood friend, John. John had initially appeared as a witness, but as the case developed, suspicions began to surround him. In the investigation room, under the pressure of increasing questions, John broke down and began to cry. I couldn't stand him anymore. He was always the best at everything, he said with a trembling voice. The investigator was surprised and asked him to explain. What do you mean, John? John took a deep breath and began to tell his story. Since childhood, he was always the first in school, popular with girls, even at work, he achieved success easily. I felt like I was his shadow. I could never catch up with him. Is that why you killed him? The investigator asked seriously. John nodded. I gradually became jealous until it turned into hatred. At first, I didn't plan to kill him, but things got out of hand. I invited him home and added a weak poison to his drink to weaken him. I didn't want to kill him with poison alone. I wanted him to suffer. John continued his story in a trembling voice. After he started to get tired, I tried to hang him. But the rope was weak, so it broke and he fell to the ground. At that moment, I panicked and didn't know what to do. So I took the gun and shot him in the middle of his forehead. The detective sat silently for a few seconds, trying to process everything John had said. Then what did I do next? I wiped my fingerprints off the gun and put the victim's fingerprints on it. Then I hid the gun in his closet to make it look like a suicide. I thought I would get away with it, but I was wrong. After John's investigation was over, Dr. Mark and Dr. Sarah met in the morgue to think about everything that had happened. The crime was over, but the psychological questions it had left behind were troubling them. Why would friends do this to each other? Just because of jealousy? Sarah asked thoughtfully. Jealousy can turn a friend into an enemy, Mark replied sadly. It's a dangerous thing. It destroys lives and makes a person do things they never imagined. The two looked at the body one last time before closing the case. It was a bitter end to a friendship that had turned into a nightmare.